ask you just say 4 lobes: frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobes. So we'll see, this is a hemisphere. So this is the frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe. Now, central sulcus is a sulcus here. You see between red frontal and blue parietal, this groove or sulcus is important. Why? Because this one is separating the frontal lobe and parietal lobe. This one. So that is the central sulcus in between frontal and parietal lobes. Parieto-occipital sulcus makes sense between parietal and occipital. Lateral sulcus, this is important, separating temporal lobe. This one, you see, this is the temporal lobe. So this is the lateral sulcus here. So separates temporal from the lobes above. Okay. And so those are important sulci. They are separating different lobes. Fissures. Transverse fissure separates cerebrum and cerebellum. So you know already this is the cerebellum and this is the cerebrum. So this is called the transverse fissure. Deep. Fissure is deep. Okay, so cerebrum and cerebellum are separated by this transverse, this way. Make sense? We know transverse is this, right? The plane. So transverse fissure. This one is lateral because in the side. So transverse. Another is longitudinal fissure. This one. It's a big one. Separates 2 hemispheres. Longitudinal fissure. And this is transverse fissure. Okay. So those are the fissures. Now, as I have mentioned, if you cut the brain, outer surface is the gray matter, which is called the cortex, cerebral cortex, and inner part is the white matter. Okay. Cerebrum. In the cerebral cortex or surface, you have many functional areas. Many, but few are those you need to know. One is the primary visual area or cortex, all the way in the back. You see here that yellow, the back of the occipital lobe, right? So here, this is called what? Primary visual. That means from the eye, retina, signal goes there, right? To give you the picture. Okay? So that's the primary, means main visual cortex. Here, I showed you already. And this is the temporal lobe. You see the upper part of the temporal lobe near the lateral sulcus, at the back of the lateral sulcus. This area is called the primary auditory cortex. So receives signal from the ear and processes the sound, gives you the sound perception. Make sense? Primary what? Auditory. This is the temporal lobe, so this is the primary auditory. In front of the central sulcus, this is the central sulcus that separates the frontal and parietal lobes, right? So in front of the central sulcus, this is called precentral gyrus, which is primary motor cortex. Precentral gyrus. Pre means before the central. That's why precentral gyrus, which is primary motor cortex. Remember, when we say motor, that indicates mainly the movement. So primary motor, that means from this area, signal goes to the muscles. Make sense? You remember at the very beginning of first lecture today, I said sensory input, integration, and then what? Motor output. Remember that? So from this area, most of the motor signals go to the muscles, motor output. Make sense? To cause the voluntary movement. So primary motor cortex. Behind the central sulcus, that gyrus is called post-central gyrus. Post means after or behind. Post-central gyrus, the blue one, dark blue, and that is called the primary somatosensory cortex. Somatosensations are touch, pain, temperature. Touch, pain, temperature. These are called somatosensations. Somatosensations. So, from your skin, for example, those signals go to the primary somatosensory cortex. Since it is sensory, it receives the signal. Okay, let's go back. In the back of the occipital lobe, this area is called what? Primary visual, right? The upper part of the temporal lobe, near the back of the lateral sulcus, this is called what? Primary auditory, right? The main area gives you sound perception, processes the sound. And this is the central sulcus. In front of the central sulcus, this gyrus is called what? Primary motor cortex. Sends signal to the skeletal muscles for movement, motor. And behind the central sulcus, this gyrus is called what? Primary somatosensory. That means somatosensations are processed there, right? Pain, touch, temperature, those feelings, sensations. Let's go to the frontal lobe. This is the frontal lobe, okay? Almost in the middle of the frontal lobe, within this dotted area, this area is called the Broca's area. Broca's area. This area is responsible for production of speech. Production of what? Speech. When you talk. There was a French neuroscientist and neurologist, physician, who had a patient for many years. That patient got stroke, okay, in the brain, and he lost his ability to speak. Okay, and at that time nobody knew, that area is responsible for speech. So after the death of that patient, Dr. Broca's, he was that a neurologist. He took his brain out, okay, and studied under the microscope. At that time, it didn't have like powerful microscope, like regular microscope. He studied all areas, okay, and found lesion in that particular area. And he first proposed that that area is responsible for his speech production because his patient had that problem, right? So, and then other scientists, they found that yes, that is true. And so Broca's was the first person who discovered that that area is responsible for the production of speech. And this area was named after his name, right? Broca's area, okay? And Broca's, his brain is also preserved now. If you go to British Museum, Science Museum, you'll see Broca's own brain is there, okay? Kept there. He donated his brain. Okay, anyway, so that's the Broca's area. Now, if you see the area within this dotted line, part of it is in parietal, part of it is in temporal, part of it is in occipital, and this area is called Wernicke's area. Wernicke's area is interesting. This is responsible for recognition of speech, speech recognition, understanding. Wernicke's area. Now you tell me, production of speech and recognition of speech, right? Two different functions. Two different functions. So, if lesion occurs in this part, the person will have problem what? Speaking. But he will understand what other people are saying. If lesion occurs here, this person will be able to produce speech, but he will not be able to understand. Make sense? This area is motor area because to produce speech, you need what? The vocal cord, right? Vocal cord must get signal from the brain. So brain to vocal cord, that is motor or sensory? Motor. Up way, sensory, right? Sensory this way, motor is this way, you know that. From brain to muscle to vocal cord to gland, motor, right? So controlling the vocal cord is motor function. That's why Broca's area is a motor area, not sensory. Wernicke's is more related to sensory functions, understanding. Okay, so those are some important areas, but there are many. Now, the frontal lobe as a whole is responsible for higher order brain functions. Frontal lobe as a whole is responsible for higher order brain functions or higher brain functions. That's why frontal lobe is bigger in human, because in human higher brain functions are more developed. You know that, right? So when I say higher brain functions, that means we have lower brain functions, right? So what are the lower brain functions and what are the higher brain functions? What do you think? How we are different in higher brain functions than other creatures? Logic, intelligence, right? Reasoning, math, problem solving, right? You can do the math. So those are higher brain functions, right? Lower functions, everybody, like all creatures, do what? Urination. You don't need higher brain function for that. Defecation, right? Those kind of, like controlling your heart, controlling your respiration, right? Those are being done to other creatures, right? Similar way. So those are not like high intelligent functions. So frontal lobe is mainly responsible for those higher order functions like judgment, emotion, intelligence, reasoning, logic, math, those functions. So some of those areas are sensory areas, some of those areas are motor areas. Sensory areas, you already know, receive signal, right? Sensory areas. For example, touch, pain, temperature, from the eye, visual signal, right? Sensory, make sense? So visual cortex is sensory cortex. Primary somatosensory, pain, touch, temperature is sensory cortex. How about auditory? Also sensory, make sense? Because going from the ear to the auditory cortex. So those areas are receiving signal from outside sensory. Is it clear? So your somatosensory cortex, your auditory cortex, your visual cortex, those are your taste, your smell, those are sensory areas. Like olfactory, gustatory means taste areas. Okay, so all these belong to sensory. Motor areas primary motor cortex, Broca's areas, right? You already know primary motor cortex and Broca's. Those are main motor areas. So we have sensory areas, we have motor areas. However, we have another type of areas. Those are called association areas. Some areas are sensory, some areas are motor, but we have another type of areas. Those are called what? Association areas. These areas are very important because association, the word, association areas combine two or more areas. So, let me give you an example. I am talking, right? You are doing what? As well as looking. That is also important, right? So you see, you are doing so many sensory inputs, right? Are going to the brain from ear, auditory, right? To the auditory cortex here. You remember I showed you the auditory cortex here, right? And from eyes, the signal are going here, far away from each other, right? But those things must be combined somewhere to make sense. Like you are watching me, I am moving my mouth, moving my hands, right? Now if you see that I am moving my mouth, I am moving my hands, and if you listen the sound from the skeleton, does it make sense? Sound should not come from there, right? Sound from what you are looking, right? Sound should also go from there. Make sense? So that's why if they are separated, first they are processed separately. From your eye, you are looking at me, the signal is going here, and at the same time you are listening, so signal is going there, right? The same time. And there must be an area where those two signals are combined together, right? To make sense. Otherwise, you will get confused. Like you are watching me moving, but sound is coming from a different place, right? So it will not give you the complete perception. Make sense? So you need those things to combine. So those are the areas where two or more modalities like listening or seeing are combined or put together. Those are the association areas. Okay? Similar way, you are eating something, the taste, right? The smell should match, right? If you smell completely, you are eating orange, and the smell is like different, then you will get confused, right? What I am eating, right? So that doesn't make sense. Okay? So you have many areas where two or more modalities are being combined. As you already know, the outer cortex is gray in the brain and inner part is white. But if you see the brainstem, cut the brainstem or the spinal cord, what you'll see, the outer area is the white matter and the inner part is the gray matter. So this is gray, this is white. This is the brainstem, like pons medulla oblongata or midbrain. This is the spinal cord. Corpus callosum, just to know that this is the structure that holds two hemispheres together. So two hemispheres are attached to each other by the corpus callosum, this structure. Not only that, through this corpus callosum, fibers go from one hemisphere to the other. So like this. If you cut the corpus callosum and see under the microscope, you will see the fibers are passing like this. From right hemisphere, fibers are going to the left. From left hemisphere, fibers are going to the right. Two hemispheres must talk to each other. Make sense? Two hemispheres. How many eyes you have? Two, right? So you have two visual cortices, right? In the back. One is here, another is here. And they must talk to each other. You have two ears, right? So two hemispheres are processing those signals, but they talk to each other all the time. So corpus callosum not only attaching or holding the hemispheres together, but through the corpus callosum, that is more important, many fibers are going from one side to the other side, like this, okay? So that is very important. Have you heard the term called callosectomy? Ectomy, dissection of corpus callosum, callosectomy. We dissect a part of the corpus callosum. In which patient? What do you think? Have you heard that? Epilepsy, severe epilepsy. If someone has uncontrolled epilepsy, that medicine is not working. Okay, so in that case, doctors sometimes they decide to do callosectomy, cut a part of the corpus callosum. The reason is, epilepsy is like this. Some part of the brain, the neurons in some part of the brain start to fire, produce action potential, get very excited, okay? And that electrical excitation, electrical signal spreads, electricity spreads, right? So that also affects the other healthy areas when the electricity spreads. Make sense? So that can cause severe epilepsy. Now, if this is the defective hemisphere, so epilepsy is being produced, electricity is being produced from here and is spreading and through the corpus callosum going to the other side too, right? So now, if you cut the corpus callosum, at least this side will not be affected. Make sense? So it will not spread to the other side. So just to control the severe form of epilepsy, we do that, callosectomy. Homunculi, it's very testing, okay? In your brain, you have the map of your whole body. Where in the brain? You see here. Your whole body map is present in the primary motor cortex and primary somatosensory cortex. So these are two homunculi in each side. So primary motor cortex has your entire body map, and primary somatosensory cortex, you also have the entire body map. Those are called homunculi. The word homunculi, have you heard this word? Anybody? Homunculus means dwarf person. So if you see that map of your whole body in those two areas, the map looks like a small dwarf person. That's why it is called homunculus. Homunculus is singular, cula is plural. So here, this is the primary somatosensory cortex. Somatosensory. It's a coronal section, okay, this way. So you see here, this is the guy. If you put all these body parts together, this guy will have big head, right? Trunk is what? Small, you see? The trunk part is very small, right? Hand is very big, right? So big hands, big head, small trunk, right? Feet are big, so that's the shape of that map, your body map, your own body map is present in the somatosensory and motor cortex. Now, this means what? This area, I said this area is face area or head area. That means what? What do you think? If I touch the face, right, here, signal from the face, skin of the face will go to this part. Make sense? If I touch the forehead, we'll go here. If I touch the cheek, we'll go here. Make sense? Sensory, sensory. And based on that, I can make your homunculus, like I will start touching every, like few millimeter and see which neurons are responding, which area is getting that signal. Make sense? Yes?
Do they measure this with like a functional MRI or something like that?
No, we did it like long ago before functional MRI was, invented. That's a very early, but I did a lot of study on this. Like, if you put electrode, insert the electrode in the brain and record the neuronal activity. If I put the electrode in the area that is receiving the signal from my fingertip, okay? I touch something here and see which neurons are getting activated, okay? So I know this area is receiving signal from this. Then I move like this, right? And do the mapping. It is a very difficult task. Before we didn't have MRI or other imaging techniques, we used to stick the electrodes, okay? And record like every few micrometer, like a very small distance, less than millimeter, okay? And with the whole body representation in the brain, okay? Did you get it? Like a hand area is this area. That means if I touch my hand, the neurons of this area, then within the hand, thumb is this, these fingers, they have different area. This is very interesting in some creatures. For example, I did a lot of study on raccoons. Raccoons? They use these two fingers a lot, right? So I was in Canada. I worked 3 years in a lab doing like a study on the raccoon's somatosensory cortex. These two finger areas are big, huge, because they use these two fingers a lot, okay, to feel the things. So you can see that how different creatures have different types of homunculus. Now, since we use our hands a lot, or fingers, to touch the things, that's why this area needs bigger representation. That means more neurons we need to process those signals. Make sense? Very simple. Trunk, we don't use a lot to touch or feel the things, right? So trunk area doesn't need that many neurons. So area is smaller, okay? So we say homunculus, if I ask you, is it proportionate or disproportionate map? Does it really represent your proportional size of body? No. So this is a disproportionate body map, right, in the brain. And we also say this is an use-dependent map. Make sense? We use those areas more. Areas presented bigger in the brain. Make sense? So use-dependent. Now, even if we compare the hand part in the brain of a normal person and a person who plays piano like 40 years, 50 years from very small childhood, okay, every day, you will see that area is bigger than normal average. Having research on those things. So we know that. I did something interesting. I did dissect the nerve of raccoons, this index finger, okay, nerve here. So from this finger, signal did not go to the brain. Make sense? First we identified that area, finger area, then dissected this. So we stopped sending signal from, the digit. And interestingly, within few days, what happens, the adjacent finger areas in the brain, they encroached, took over the whole this area in the brain. Since we didn't use, the raccoon didn't use this. So surgically, if you remove or dissect the nerve here, you will see what kind of change occurs in the brain. The adjacent areas take over the area. Okay? That means the map is changing, right? You can change that map. That is the use dependent. Okay? No use the map will be taken by adjacent areas. Those areas are working more. So that's the sensory. Now if you see the primary motor cortex, very similar. We move our hands a lot, that's why bigger presentation. We use our mouth, move our mouth a lot, that's why this part is also bigger in the motor. Now, how you can create the motor map? Motor is output, right? You know, motor output. So touch will not work to create that map. What we'll do, we'll put the electrode in different parts of the motor cortex, okay, and stimulate a little bit like weak electrical stimulation, right? So if I now see, if I put an electrode here and stimulate these neurons, from these neurons, signal will go to my thumb, motor, right? We know this area. So if I stimulate here, that signal will go to my thumb, right? To the muscle of my thumb. So you'll see like this. Every time I send electrical stimulus, it will flex like this. Okay? Then if I do, you know, an arm area, then you'll see the movement of the arm. Make sense? So that tells that this area is sending signal to that skeletal muscles of that area, right? So that's how you create the motor map. And that is the motor homunculus. If you amputate the limb, the entire area is reorganized. Okay, the reorganization occurs in that map. That's another field, very interesting field of neuroscience, that is called the plasticity, how the map shifts or changes. Okay, I did a lot of experiments on that. So let's see, stop here. Okay. So the plasticity of the brain is a very interesting field of neuroscience. You know how the brain is changing. You can change your brain by changing the plasticity.